Ellen DeGeneres had encountered unexpected moments and spontaneous audience reactions throughout her decades-long career, from surprise celebrity appearances to heartwarming audience participation, but nothing could have prepared her for the afternoon when what seemed like a routine interview about social activism and community engagement would evolve into an unprecedented challenge to the fundamental structure of talk show entertainment. What started as Ellen maintaining her typical hosting control became a real-time experiment in collaborative storytelling when her audience decided they could conduct a better interview than she was providing. It was a vibrant Friday afternoon at the Ellen Studios, and the atmosphere was energetic as they prepared for what was scheduled to be an inspiring episode featuring stories of grassroots activism and community organizing. Ellen, wearing a bold turquoise blazer over black pants, was looking forward to interviewing Marcus Williams, a 29-year-old community organizer whose work in urban education reform and youth mentorship programs had been gaining national attention through social media campaigns and local news coverage. Marcus's story was exactly the kind of uplifting narrative that Ellen loved to feature, someone who had grown up in challenging circumstances, had overcome obstacles through education and community support, and was now dedicating his life to creating opportunities for other young people facing similar challenges. According to his preliminary materials, Marcus had established after-school programs in 5 different cities, had secured over $2 million in funding for educational initiatives, and had personally mentored more than 200 at-risk youth over the past decade. Our next guest is proof that one person really can make a difference in their community, Ellen announced to the enthusiastic studio audience. He's created educational programs that are changing lives, mentoring young people who need guidance, and showing us all what grassroots activism looks like. His work reminds us that real change starts at the local level with people who care enough to act. Please welcome community organizer Marcus Williams. The audience erupted in warm, supportive applause as Marcus walked onto the stage with confident, purposeful steps. He was a charismatic man with an easy smile, wearing a well-fitted navy suit that suggested both professionalism and accessibility. What struck Ellen most was his immediate connection with the audience. As he walked to his chair, he made eye contact with various audience members, waved, and seemed genuinely excited to share his story with them. "Marcus, welcome to the show," Ellen said warmly as they embraced briefly. "Thank you so much for having me, Ellen, and thank you to this amazing audience for the energy you're bringing today," Marcus replied, addressing both Ellen and the studio audience with equal attention and enthusiasm. "Tell us about your work in urban education. What inspired you to focus on after-school programs?" Marcus's expression became passionate as he began sharing his story. "Ellen, I grew up in a neighborhood where after-school hours were the most dangerous time for kids. No supervision, no positive activities, no safe spaces to do homework or just be kids. I started my first program because I remembered what it felt like to be 12 years old with nowhere to go and nothing productive to do." "That's wonderful. How do you measure the success of these programs?" As Ellen asked this question, she heard a voice from the audience call out clearly, "That's not the right question." Ellen paused, looking toward the audience with surprise. "I'm sorry?" A woman in the third row stood up, addressing Marcus directly rather than Ellen. "Marcus, what I want to know is, what was the moment you realized you had the power to change things? Because that's what people need to hear about." Ellen felt a moment of irritation at the interruption. "Ma'am, I appreciate your interest, but I'll be conducting the interview." Marcus, however, looked intrigued by the audience member's question. "Actually, that's a really insightful question. Ellen, would it be okay if I answered that?" Before Ellen could respond, another audience member stood up. "Marcus, my question is about sustainability. How do you keep these programs running when funding is always uncertain?" Ellen felt her control of the interview slipping and attempted to regain authority. "Folks, I know you're excited about Marcus's work, but we have a format here that—" "The format is boring," called out a man from the back row. "You want to know things that actually matter, not just the surface stuff." Ellen felt a surge of defensive anger. "Excuse me, I've been conducting interviews for decades. I think I know how to ask meaningful questions. Then why aren't you asking them? Responded a teenage girl in the front row. Marcus is doing incredible work and you're asking him corporate interview questions instead of getting to the heart of what he's actually accomplished. Marcus looked between Ellen and the increasingly vocal audience with obvious fascination. Ellen, what if we tried something different? What if we let the audience drive this conversation for a few minutes? Ellen felt genuinely threatened by this suggestion. Marcus, that's not how television works. There's a structure, a flow, production considerations. But what if the structure is getting in the way of the story? Asked an older woman in the middle section. Marcus, tell us about a specific kid whose life you changed. Give us names, details, real stories. Marcus's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Oh, I can absolutely do that. There's this kid named Jamal who came to our program when he was 13. He'd been in 3 different schools, had never finished a semester anywhere. Ellen attempted to interrupt. Marcus, we should probably keep personal details private for legal reasons. No, that's exactly wrong, called out a young man near the front. The power of his work is in the real stories. Marcus, keep going about Jamal. Marcus looked at Ellen apologetically but continued his story. Jamal was angry, had every right to be angry, and he didn't trust any adults. For the first 6 months in our program, he barely spoke to anyone. What changed? Asked the teenage girl who had spoken earlier. One day he saw me reading a book about astronomy during lunch break. Turns out he'd always been fascinated by space, but had never had anyone to talk to about it. We started meeting twice a week just to look at star charts and talk about planets. Ellen felt increasingly irrelevant as the conversation flowed between Marcus and the audience without her mediation. What happened to Jamal? Interrupted an elderly man in the 4th row. He's now in his 2nd year of college studying astrophysics, Marcus said with obvious pride. He still calls me every month to update me on his classes. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, more enthusiastic than any response Ellen's questions had generated. Ellen made a decision to reclaim control. That's a beautiful story, Marcus. But let's talk about the broader impact of your programs. Why are you trying to make this generic? Asked a middle-aged woman with obvious frustration. We want to hear about the kids, not statistics. Ellen felt genuinely hurt by the criticism. I'm trying to conduct a professional interview that serves our viewing audience. We are your viewing audience, called out a young woman near the back. And we're telling you what we want to hear about. Marcus looked at Ellen with gentle concern. Ellen, what if we let them guide us? They're asking really good questions that I'd love to answer. Ellen struggled with her instinct to maintain control versus her recognition that the audience was indeed asking more engaging questions than she had been. Unusual doesn't mean wrong, said the man who had first challenged her. Marcus, tell us about a time when one of your programs failed. What did you learn from that? Marcus paused thoughtfully. That's actually a harder question than anything I usually get asked in interviews. There was a program in Detroit that I was certain would work, but I didn't spend enough time understanding the specific needs of that community. What did you do wrong? Pressed the same audience member. I assumed I knew what kids needed instead of asking them what they needed. I designed a program based on what had worked in other cities without accounting for the unique challenges and strengths of Detroit kids. Ellen found herself genuinely interested in this direction of conversation. That's actually a really important point about community organizing. See? Said the teenage girl. Now you're asking good follow-up questions instead of moving on to the next prepared topic. Ellen felt a mixture of embarrassment and recognition. You're saying my interviews are too surface level? We're saying they could go deeper, replied the older woman who had spoken earlier. You have incredible guests with amazing stories, but sometimes it feels like you're more interested in moving through your list than really exploring what they have to say. Marcus nodded in agreement. Ellen, I've done a lot of interviews, and the best ones are always the ones where the interviewer follows their genuine curiosity instead of sticking to predetermined questions. Ellen felt vulnerable but also intrigued by this unexpected feedback. Okay, what would you want to know about Marcus that I haven't asked? How does he handle burnout? Called out one voice. "What does he do when a kid he's trying to help makes bad choices anyway?" called out another. "How does he balance helping individuals with creating systemic change?" asked a third. Ellen looked at Marcus with new appreciation for the depth of his work. "Those are really sophisticated questions, Marcus. Do you experience burnout?" "Constantly," Marcus replied with refreshing honesty. "There are weeks when I question whether I'm making any real difference. When I see kids I've worked with end up in jail or dropping out despite everything we've tried to provide." "How do you handle that?" Ellen asked, now genuinely curious rather than following a script. "I've learned that my job isn't to save every kid," Marcus said thoughtfully. "My job is to create opportunities and show up consistently. What kids do with those opportunities is up to them." Ellen felt engaged in a way she hadn't experienced during an interview in months. That must be incredibly difficult emotionally. It is, but the alternative, not trying at all, is worse than the pain of sometimes failing. The audience had grown quiet, listening intently to this more vulnerable and honest conversation. Ellen turned to address the cameras and audience. "You know what, folks? This audience just taught me something important about interviewing. Sometimes the best questions come from genuine curiosity rather than professional preparation." She looked back at Marcus with newfound respect. "Marcus, thank you for being willing to go deeper than my surface-level questions were allowing." "Thank you for being willing to let the conversation evolve," Marcus replied. "This has been one of the most meaningful interviews I've ever done." Ellen addressed the audience directly. "And thank you all for challenging me to be better. It's not comfortable to receive feedback during a live taping. But you were right, Marcus deserved deeper questions than I was asking." 3 months later, Ellen made a significant change to her interview preparation process. Instead of relying solely on pre-written questions, she began incorporating audience input and allowing for more spontaneous exploration of topics that emerged naturally during conversations. 6 months later, Ellen invited Marcus back to the show, along with several audience members from the original taping, to discuss how collaborative interviewing had changed both her approach to hosting and the quality of conversations on her show. "What that day taught me," Ellen reflected months later, "is that expertise can come from unexpected places." Those audience members were asking better questions than I was because they were approaching Marcus's work with genuine curiosity rather than professional obligation. The episode became a landmark moment for discussions about collaborative media, the value of audience participation, and the importance of authentic curiosity in creating meaningful conversations. Sometimes, Ellen would say in subsequent interviews, the best way to serve your audience is to listen to what they're actually interested in, rather than assuming you know what they want to hear. The Audience Rebellion episode led to Ellen developing a regular segment called Audience Asks, where studio audience members could submit and ask questions directly to guests, resulting in some of the most compelling and authentic conversations her show had ever featured. Because sometimes the most important lesson in leadership is learning when to follow, and sometimes the best way to maintain control is to give it away to people who are asking the right questions for the right reasons.